Hey guys, this is Doc Hoff coming to you again from my studio here in Alvin, Texas. Today I am bringing you an entirely new guest, and that is David Cohen. Now, David is an attorney, but he also has some special interest in real estate. In fact, his company does a great deal with occupational opportunity zones. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about what that is, about some of the well, gosh, we just have a range of topics today.
Search engine optimization, or SEO, is a hallmark of an exceptionally visible website. Here at Art of Dental Marketing, we know that it's crucial. It bumps you up to the top of Google search results and more. But did you know that it's also one of the only online marketing channels that can continue to pay dividends over time? At ADM, we expertly craft your online presence to help you evolve with modern marketing. For more information, search artofdentalmarketing.com or call us at 816-631-0954.
David, other than the opportunity zones, what all are we talking about?
Well, I think we're talking about sort of transitions and opportunity zones and how they mesh together and why they're relevant and applicable to a lot of our dentist friends here and clients.
Fantastic. Well, without further ado, David, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and introduce yourself, talk to us a little bit about your law firm, and let our viewers know how they can get in touch with you if they want to, get your advice on either, the opportunity zones or transitions or what have you.
Sure. My name's David Cohen, obviously, and I own two law firms. One is a dental law firm where we help dentists primarily buy and sell dental practices. We do between 300 to 400 practice transitions nationwide yearly. So it's definitely an area that we're well versed in and handling every single day. And I also own a commercial real estate law firm, Cohen Property Law Group, which focuses on commercial real estate transactions. In addition, I have a qualified opportunity zone fund, and that's one thing that we just referenced we'll talk about later. But the foundations are really these two law firms that lead to the Opportunity Zone Fund. And if you want to get in touch with me, the best way to do so would be either via email, which is david@cohenlawfirm.com. It's David at COHENLAWFIRM, P as in Paul, LLC.com. And also, I've been known to give my cell number out on podcasts, and no one has ever abused it. So I will continue to do that until
no 2 o'clock in the morning calls when they're getting out of the bar, right?
Exactly. So it's 206-919-9060, and I'm good with texts and calls and all that. So I would look forward to feedback and hearing from you and answering any questions that I can. Try to be as resourceful as I can for the dental community, as it's a community that I love and that I grew up in, with my father being a periodontist and all that. So definitely want to give back and help out where I can.
Fantastic. Well, you kind of answered what one of my next questions was going to be. And the practice of law for dentists is a pretty specific area. And I'm sure that the real estate probably sprang off of the fact that you're dealing with a lot of high net worth individuals. So, you got into lawyering for dentists because your dad was a periodontist. Talk to us a little bit about the journey there and what your motivator was. What was it that finally made you go, you know what, I want to go to law school?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it all started via basketball, believe it or not. I played basketball all through college. Actually did not play as much as I would have loved to in college. But that kind of led me to believe that there's no way I was going to play professionally and that I needed to do something else. And so at the time, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but law always intrigued me. And it was really as simple as I was in a Barnes and Noble, if those even exist anymore. And I picked up an LSAT book, which is the exam that you take in order to get into law school. And I just started browsing through it. And I was like, oh, well, I think I can answer these questions. I think I can do this. So I decided to just take the LSAT because it would give me some options. And then when I was doing the practice tests and realized that I could get a score good enough to get into law school, probably, I decided, okay, well, let's study this thing and see what I can do here and give myself as many options as I can. So I ended up applying to law school, several, and then I decided that I was going to go to law school just to build a foundation for life. Law school is amazing to build your life foundation. It doesn't always mean you have to end up being a lawyer practicing law. It's really about building a foundation, understanding how to think about things critically, how to deal with more information than you have time for, and to really pick out what is important. And also, just in general, how to critically think. So went to law school, and after law school, I decided that I wanted to be in the transactional world, and I wanted to find a way to get back and work with the dental world because my father is a periodontist. And I'd always grew up in the dental world, being around my father and his friends, and I thought that it was just an intriguing group of people to connect with and be able to do business with. And so I ended up starting my own law firm in 2010 after some clients had asked me to help them before I even had the law firm officially, and just through contacts that I had. And then, doing that, I realized I liked the work and it was a huge need in the dental world. And so then I started my own law firm in 2010 and been focusing primarily on practice transitions because there are so many of them nationwide after that. And so that's how I started the firm and how I got into the dental.
Well, one of the big pieces of advice I always give people is if you're selling a practice and there's not a lawyer involved, you've screwed up already. These contracts, they're not, I like to tell people contracts are not about the marriage. They're about the breakup. It's not for when things are going well. It's for when someone does something that you're not happy with. So question for you, would you go back to law school knowing what you know today and feeling the way that you do about the practice of law?
Absolutely. I would go to law school. Like I said, it's just builds an incredible foundation. It teaches you how to think. In fact, it almost makes you too good, like from that standpoint. Like it's hard for me to read leisurely things anymore. Like if I was to read a novel, I'm just like flying through it, just picking out what's most important on the page so that I can understand like what the point is, and then go to the next page and just like flying through it instead of really like enjoying the moment and taking it all in and reading, for enjoyment.
That's funny.
But yeah, I absolutely would go back, knowing what I know now. It was an amazing experience, not just from a thinking standpoint, but also from a dealing with adversity standpoint. As you're sort of measured against all your other classmates, the rankings in your class is based on how you do relative to everybody else. And, the Socratic method with, the professors calling you out and having, asking you questions in class and sort of singling you out was also it's not something that people love, but it also is a good way to deal with adversity and be able to handle things when you're challenged. So I think it's great for anybody really that's looking to build a foundation, get into business. And I do think that it helped me a lot now. Like I'd be lying if I said that the courses that I took in law school have helped me in my career personally, just because I've been such a unique niche industry. But I think the foundational thinking behind it was what I really gained a lot of strength from. And it's really cool that you mentioned, it's all about the breakup, because you're right. I tell doctors all the time that are in partnerships, you want to sign this and never pick it up again. However, unfortunately, some people have to pick it up again. And if you do, you really need to make sure that you're covered. So I agree 100%.
Absolutely. Nobody wants to get that prenup, but they sure are glad they had one whenever they, get served.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about the transaction side of things and what you do there. And then we can move on to real estate and then more specifically, opportunity zone investments.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to doing that.
Is your resume or job posting just not being seen? You need a better plan. Whether you're looking for a permanent or temporary position or looking to hire, at Cloud Dentistry, we have you covered. We connect practices with verified professionals interested in temp and permanent work. Sign up for your free account in just 2 easy steps. Go Go to www.clouddentistry.com and start browsing the dental talent in your area today.
So we represent buyers and we represent sellers. I'd say about half our clients are buyers and about half of them are sellers. So we're seeing it from both sides. And the main things that we help buyers with in their transitions are going to be forming a business entity in the state that they're in to purchase the practice that they're buying, reviewing the legal documents to effectuate the purchase of the practice. And I say review because typically in the industry, the seller's counsel drafts the documents and the buyer's reviews. It's kind of a state-by-state thing. Like, for instance, Florida, I find, is a little more 50-50 on who drafts. But in general, seller's counsel typically drafts and buyer's reviews. And then also reviewing any type of lease or real estate purchase associated with the deal, which you referenced earlier, creates the crossover between the dental and the real estate side, which we can get to later. But those are the main things that we help buyers with. And then, of course, we always engage in all, revisions and communications and negotiations that are associated with that. When we represent a seller, it's similar, except we're not forming a business entity because the seller already has one that they own their practice with. And really what we're doing is drafting, in most cases, the sale documents where the seller is effectuating the sale of their assets to the buyer, and then either drafting a lease or drafting real estate sale documentation if the doctor owns the building. And if they don't own the building, then reviewing lease assignment documentation for that doctor for the lease that they're going to be transferring over to the buyer. And we also always review the lease itself for the, sorry for the background. We always review the lease itself because it's really important. Like, a lot of doctors just think that I'm just going to transfer over the lease, right?
Not unless there's a provision in the lease that allows you to do that.
Exactly. So, you got to review the lease itself, not only to make sure that there's a provision in there that allows you to do it, but also to make sure that you're not triggering any other adverse events by virtue of transfer your lease. And so just to kind of wind back to what you just, well noted, was your lease document is going to have a provision that is based on assignment of your lease. Most leases will say that the lessee cannot assign the lease without the landlord's consent. Now, if you have a decently well-negotiated lease, it'll at least say that the lessee can't transfer the lease without the landlord's consent. However, the landlord can't unreasonably delay or withhold the consent. So that at least gives you some leverage to where the landlord can't just say no because they feel like saying no or because they like you a lot better as a tenant. I mean, we get a lot of clients that say, well, I've been an amazing tenant. I've paid my rent on time for 15 years and I've, done everything what they've told me to do. Well, that's why they like you. And that's why they're going to have a hard time wanting to let you transfer the lease, because you are such a good tenant. If you were a terrible tenant, they'd actually be excited probably. So maybe the moral of the story is be a bad tenant and you may have a better chance of getting your lease assigned. But usually in every deal, the lease is permitted to be assigned. It takes more work with landlords than others in some cases, but usually it's the case. But you have to typically ask the landlord for consent. On rare occasions, we will see leases that say that the tenant can assign upon their own volition, but it's very rare. So you got to look at the lease, make sure that you can get the landlord's consent. And then if you get the landlord's consent, you want to look at any type of guarantees that you have in transferring the lease, just because you as a lessee are probably personally guaranteeing the lease. Most leases and most landlords make a tenant personally guarantee the lease. And most sellers don't want to continue to personally guarantee the lease after they sell the practice, because now they don't own the practice, they have nothing to do with it, they don't want to still be on the hook with the landlord. Problem is, most landlords will not allow that, and they have the leverage because they usually have to consent to you assigning your lease to begin with, so they don't have to consent, you don't stay on the guarantee. And in addition, a lot of the leases that we see our doctors sign already say that they will remain a guarantor if they do assign the lease. They've already pre-agreed to that. So it's really tough to negotiate otherwise.
Right.
So point being, it's really key to review the lease to begin with, just to understand your rights. In addition, we have found some really onerous clauses in leases recently, stating that the tenant has to share profits from their sale of their practice or of their business, but it is a practice, with the landlord if they transfer the lease. We were just on a deal not too long ago in Hawaii where the landlord wanted, it was a DSO deal, big DSO deal, and the landlord wanted like over $1 million in profits from the sale.
Wow.
So, and actually they probably were owed that. There was a negotiation that took place, but based on what the tenant signed, the doctor signed, they probably actually really technically owed that. Now, of course, the doctor could always say, well, fine, I'm just not going to sell. And then they could, potentially just wait until the lease is up. Then they have to move the office. Right. And in addition, a lot of these leases will say something like, even if you tell the landlord that you want to transfer your lease, that alone gives the landlord the right to terminate your lease if they want to.
And something you bring up there, you had mentioned something a little earlier whenever we were talking about assignment of the leases. A couple of things that I've seen myself in some of the people that we help in the group. One is a lot of doctors these days are starting to rent out a part of their practice to another doctor. And a lot of times the assignment of lease clause specifically says you may not sublet the area that you're in. So that's one thing that we could probably talk about, where people aren't even transacting that they may need your services. Another one is the CAM. I think a lot of people don't look closely enough at the CAM and what percentage it can go up by, or if there is a limit as to how much it can go up each year. And the landlords a lot of times will stick you there. You might get what you want per square foot, but you're going to end up paying out of the nose for the rest of your practice life because there's no limit on how much the CAM can go up. So talk to us a little bit about what your recommendations in those two areas are for dentists looking at a leasehold.
Yeah. So to answer those, number one, you're absolutely right. Assignment clauses in a lease typically also talk about subletting rather. And so usually these leases will say that you can't assign or sublet your space without the landlord's consent. So they usually go hand in hand. Not always, but usually they're in the same area of the contract. And you're absolutely right. Most leases say that the tenant can't do that. We've had some really unique situations where a doctor does want to go use the space in another doctor's office once a week or twice a week, or, and it's like, how do they navigate the lease around that? Do they just create an independent contractor relationship where like they're being brought into that doctor's practice and then they just pay them like a percentage of the collections and just try to like work backwards and get the number that they wanted that they would normally pay in a lease? I mean, that's a little tricky. That's not always the best way to go. It can kind of circumvent the subletting issue, but really, subletting is what you probably have to do. And what these leases say is that you can't sublet without the landlord's consent. In addition, that whole sharing the profit upon sale also kind of can bleed sometimes into the subletting, which I can kind of understand. I mean, the landlord is essentially saying, hey, tenant, if you're going to sublet the space, the excess that you get from the sublease beyond what you're paying me, landlord, in the regular lease and the master lease, you have to give to me or share with me as the landlord. And so you also want to look into that and make sure that you're not violating the lease if the landlord does agree to let you sublet the space. So yeah, I mean, subletting is also a big issue as well as assignment. I mean, when you're reviewing a lease, the assignment and subletting are critical to review, just because all doctors want an exit strategy, and the exit strategy can't be fully accomplished without being able to transfer over the lease for the real estate if you don't own the building. So that's something that has to be negotiated. That's why it's great to have lawyers involved. Now, again, I wouldn't have the unreasonable expectation that just because you have a lawyer, you're going to be able to get the whole clause kicked out and replaced with language saying you can assign the lease at any time, because that's just not common. And if you flip roles and you think about you being landlord, doctor, you'd want to approve of whoever's coming into your space. You would also want to consent to that. So it makes a lot of sense. As far as CAM is concerned, yeah, I definitely recommend having some sort of cap as far as that's concerned. I think what the cap is depends a little more on the situation and the geography and like where you are and what's common in the area. Our real estate attorneys that like specialize in real estate, it's all they do, really have a handle on the geographies, what's common in the scenario,
and what's reasonable, in a certain area.
Exactly. And so, yeah, we work with clients all the time on that. That's always a big issue. You nailed it, so I agree 100%.
So let's finish up on our transition section and give us maybe like the top 5 things that people should be aware of when they are doing a transition. So far as the legal documents go, top 5 bullet points to check off to make sure that your document's getting a good start.
Great question. Top 5. I'm just going to rattle it off, and I'm not going to say these are in particular order. I'm just going to say they're all of equal importance. Number 1, non-compete. Whether you're a buyer or you're a seller, the non-compete is always going to be a critical item in the transition. If you're the buyer, you don't want the seller competing with you, and you also don't want them soliciting your staff, your referral sources, or your patients. And so you're always going to want a non-compete when you're a buyer. In fact, your lender probably wouldn't lend you the money without one. And the parameters of the non-compete, I'll touch on here in a minute. If you're a seller and you just have to understand and be accountable, you're selling your business. In exchange for that, you're getting money. And as a result of you getting money, there are things you have to relinquish, and you're relinquishing ownership of the practice, but you also owe the buyer a non-compete, non-solicit. You can't have your cake and eat it too, and I think that's something that I see a little bit too often, particularly from doctors, even that never plan to practice again. They just want to hang on. It's like, hey, if, the world comes to an end and I have to go back and practice, I just need to make sure that I can do it in my own town and not, somewhere. It's like, no. You're selling your practice. You got to relinquish that and respect the buyer's non-compete. If the world ends, then you're going to have to go somewhere else. But the chances of the world ending are probably slim. And if it does, you can then drive half hour to go, to the other town or whatever it is. So point is either way, you're going to have it. Now, what is the parameter around that? Like what mile rate?
What's enforceable and where? I know in Texas, I believe in December of 2022, I could be wrong on the date, they just had another amendment to the non-compete clauses in Texas, and California has not just outlawed them 100%, but they've also begun going across state lines to pursue people who put non-compete clauses in remote workers' contracts. So I know you definitely want to make sure you get a good lawyer involved, because it's getting to be some really sticky ground now.
Yeah, agreed. And just to kind of start, go to the foundation of that, every state's different, and most states don't want to place restraint on trade, meaning they don't want to stop people from making a living. So in many states, a non-compete is actually outlawed with exception, right? So non-competes are outlawed except if they fall within the parameters of what we're saying is okay, right? And every state's a little bit different. Now, you have states that are very strict on non-competes, but some of which are just very strict for associates. If you're working in an employment capacity, they're basically not enforceable. Some examples I can think of are, California, Colorado, even Alabama. It's very tough to enforce a non-compete in an employment situation. But the exception has typically been that if there's a sale of goodwill in a business, that a non-compete is enforceable. And so that's something that obviously state by state, you're going to have to work with your attorney on. Now, but what are the parameters, right? If the non-compete is permitted in the state that you're in, what are the parameters? And most states have a parameter that is the smallest mile radius that can protect the person that's supposed to be protected without prejudicing the other. So, and really the way I kind of like define that in English is it's got to be reasonable. So, they want the smallest parameters because they don't want to restrain trade, but they also don't want to prejudice the person that isn't supposed to be competing. So like,
and again, that's going to be geographic as well, guys, because a 5-mile non-compete radius over here in Alvin, Texas is not a big deal, but a 5-mile non-compete in downtown Dallas is a huge deal.
Absolutely. You nailed it. And so it's really important to understand that, we get the questions all the time. Well, is it 3 year, 10 miles, the standard? Well, no. I mean, it depends on where you are. It depends on a lot of different things. And, unfortunately lenders, and I love our dental lenders, but this isn't like their fault. I mean, it's really more, I think, comes from the top, but they have boxes to check and they have parameters, and it'll say it's got to be at least 3 years, 10 miles. But really that may not work. Like if you're in New York City, maybe the years, but not the miles, right? So it's
exactly
really all about the circumstance.
So that brings us to our number 2 box to check off.
So just kind of concluding that non-compete, it's really important that you nail that properly with your attorney. Number 2, from my standpoint, I would say is the tax allocation. And, I'm not a CPA, no profess to be a tax expert, but, in us doing 300 to 400 practice transitions yearly, we do understand enough about the allocation to at least talk, in an educated way about it, but also to make sure that we're telling the client to defer to their CPA on what the tax allocation is. And now, just to sort of break it down for the listeners in the audience, you have a purchase price when you buy or sell a practice, and the purchase price gets allocated among all the assets that are being sold. So accounts receivable, furniture, fixtures, equipment, supplies, goodwill, all these different things are being sold as assets in a sale. The purchase price, let's just call it $500,000. That is going to get allocated amongst all those different things being sold. So if the equipment is worth $150,000, well, then $150,000 gets allocated to equipment. You have $350,000 left, and then that's going to get allocated among the other assets, right? So point being is you don't want to just like gloss over that and think, okay, well, this all adds up to $500,000, so I'm good. You want to talk to your financial experts, your CPAs, to make sure that it works for you, because typically when you're selling a practice, you want as much allocated to goodwill as you can. And if you're the buyer, you want to allocate as much to tangible assets like furniture, fixtures, and equipment that you can. Now, the standard typically, I would say, is between 70 to 80% of the purchase price in a private sale deal is going to be goodwill. And then the rest is going to be the other assets. Why is that the case? It's sort of weighted toward the seller's favor just organically as the standard, just because the seller has more to lose. The buyer typically can write off everything just over a longer period of time if it's goodwill, whereas the seller gets nailed from a tax standpoint, if it's not goodwill. So I would say just make sure you review the tax allocation with your CPA and financial people. That would be number 2.
Absolutely. I'll tell you, one of the things that I suggest is whenever you are selling a practice, you bring in your financial advisors, your financial planners, your CPA, and your lawyer. There's a very little known vehicle that utilizes a trust. And what happens is whenever you sell the practice, you're actually selling the practice through the trust. The trust gets all of the proceeds from the practice sale. Then the trust loans you money. Then you take out an insurance policy on your own life. You take out a whole life policy. And at the end of the loan's period where everything becomes due, that policy pays off the loan. And so you end up getting no taxable event for the entire period of the loan, which means that you don't owe Uncle Sam shit until you actually get that money back. And then when you do get the taxable event, all the taxes are paid for because you had this life insurance policy specifically set to that amount. It's a complicated vehicle, people. But I'll tell you what, if MB2 would have allowed me to use that vehicle, I damn sure would have done it, because it would have saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes. Get a lawyer involved, people. All right. Number 3, my friend.
Number 3, I would say, is going to be contingencies to the deal. And what are contingencies? Contingencies are things that need to happen in order for your deal to close once you've signed your document. So this is really key, because most deals that we see, the doctors sign the contracts in advance to close at a later date. Why? Number one, they're oftentimes the lender will kind of need signed documents in order to trigger their ability to fund the loan. Number 2, parties often just want to know they have a deal, at least subject to contingencies. And so, if you're in November negotiating your contracts and you're closing on January 1 or December 31 or something like that, a lot of people don't want to wait till then. They want to sign the contract so they can feel good about the fact they have a deal. So if you're going to do that, though, then it's really important to have contingencies in your deal. If you're a buyer, some really key contingencies are going to be, number 1, the financing, that you have secured the financing to purchase the practice. What you don't want to have happen is you sign the contract, your financing falls through, or you have an issue. Right now, financing is a little bit funny. Sometimes doctors have a loan, an interest rate on their loan for a certain period of time locked in, and then it expires, and then they have to go back to square one, and maybe that's going to be higher, right? And so the point is, you just never know what's going to happen as far as the loan is concerned. And also, even if you get loan approval, it's not really approved until it's funded.
Until it's funded.
Now, I will say that in nearly every case where you get a loan approval, usually you get the loan, but not always. And then obviously the extreme example would be COVID hitting. That changed the game a lot with loans. But point being is that's important. It's subject to you getting the funds, because it's a factor beyond your control as a buyer. If you're getting a loan from a third party, you're relying on the third party to fund the loan, and you don't have control over that. So that's number 1. Number 2 is, and this is pretty beneficial for both parties, but you want to make sure you have a lease or building purchase contingency. If you're buying a practice, you don't want to buy the practice and not have a place to practice. So you really need to make sure there's a lease contingency. So those are kind of like 2 examples for buyers, just to kind of give you a flavor of what we're talking about. On the sell side, also that real estate lease contingency is important. And there could be other random things. We have doctors who may have multiple locations, and they'd only sell one if they're able to sell the other, and they're transparent about it. And so there needs to be a contingency that says that it's contingent on the other sale happening. Or let's say they do own the real estate and they want to sell the real estate. It's important for them to say that they want a contingency that the deal isn't closed without the real estate being sold. Because, what can happen is a buyer may think they have the financing for the real estate, or they think they're going to get it and they don't. And then a lot of times they just revert to a lease because they don't have it. Well, some sellers are okay with that and some aren't. Some would never do the deal if they didn't sell the real estate. And conversely, for a buyer, you may have not want to do the deal unless you can buy the real estate. So, those are just kind of some examples of the contingencies, but it's really important to do that, because if you're signing in advance, and something comes to light, you don't want it to bite you later. And I'll just kind of bring up one more, is representations and warranties. These are promises in your legal agreement, your sale agreement, that each party has to make to each other about the deal, essentially, or for the seller about the practice, for the buyer about themselves. And it's a great contingency to put in, that all reps and warranties are true and accurate. Because if let's say you're a buyer, you signed November 1 and you're closing January 1, and the seller repped and warranted and promised to you as a buyer that they didn't have any lawsuits against them, and then you find out that they did, well, you don't want to just deal with that, even though they're in breach. I mean, what are you going to do? You don't want to go, you don't want your first endeavor to be suing someone else. You want to focus on actually practicing. So it'd be better if you could say, well, if I don't like what that lawsuit is all about, then, and I think it could affect my practice moving forward as a buyer, maybe I don't want to do this deal. All right. So that's just one example.
One that comes up a lot. and I believe it, that's why I smiled when you said warranties. I believe it actually comes under this portion of things, is post diligence financial changes in the practice. What will happen a lot of times, guys, is you buy a practice from an older dentist and he's a skinflint. That son of a bitch hasn't given his people a raise for 15 freaking years. But the moment he believes a deal is going through in post diligence, he's going to give them all raises to make sure no one leaves because they know the practice is being sold. And guess who gets stuck holding that shitty bag? You do. So speak a little bit to that. You're smiling, so I can tell you've already had to deal with that one.
Yeah, absolutely. This happens actually more often in our DSO sales, but it also happens in private sales for sure. So yeah, I mean, oftentimes there will be reps and warranties in the agreement that will state that the buyer has to or the seller has to promise that they haven't raised any salaries since blank date, right? And if the seller just glosses over those and doesn't really read the reps and warranties or even hire an attorney to go through them with them, they could be promising something that isn't true. And then afterward, like you said about holding the bag, you know, the buyer can say, well, now you put me in a really tough spot. You raised all these salaries. Now these people have granted they stayed, which is good if the buyer wants them to stay. But now they've got all these unreasonable expectations. It changes the underwriting of the deal for me as a buyer because, you know, this deal economically made sense based on paying these people what they paid before.
Right, before they chopped off a good piece of the EBITDA.
Right, exactly. And, you know, so yeah, 100%, you know, that's something that needs to be highlighted.
All right, I think we're at number 4.
Yeah, so number 4, I would say is going to surround the well, I was going to actually talk about reps and warranties as number 4, which we kind of like bled into that, but I'll still make it number 4, you know, because number 3 was about a contingency and saying that reps and warranties being true and accurate are a contingency of the deal. But now let's go into the reps and warranties, number 4. And what we just talked about was these are things the buyer and seller are promising to each other. You know, the buyer might promise that they don't have any conflicts and anything that's keeping them from being able to do this deal, right? A seller may have to rep and warrant way more things than a buyer because it's their practice, they have more to promise, and that's going to be that the financials are true and accurate. Like we talked about, that they haven't raised salaries over the past, you know, X amount of months, that they have filed taxes properly, that they're not in arrears or anything like that, that they don't have any conflicts that would prevent them from doing the deal. You know, one example could be, you know, if they got a purchase agreement or a binding LOI or something out on their practice, they're not really, you know, having the authority to sell this practice to you as a buyer. That'd be pretty rare, but I actually have seen that occur before. So, you know, reps and warranties are really important. They can be glazed over or glossed over, but I think it's really important to make sure you're reading through each one of them as a buyer and a seller, because these are things you're promising. And if you're promising something and you're not knowing what you're promising, you could be promising something that isn't true. And if it's not true, it could be used against you. Now, but let's say you're a seller, you rep and warrant that you haven't raised salaries, right? And the buyer actually is happy you raised the salaries because they knew that's what it took to keep these people. And now you look like a hero coming in saying, hey, I'm not changing a thing in this practice, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then there's no loss. Like in order to sue someone, you have to have loss. And so there'd be no loss there. So it's kind of like a no harm, no foul. But if it's the scenario we already talked about, which is there is loss because the buyer...
I have to go back and correct you on something.
Yeah, go ahead.
To win a lawsuit, you have to prove loss. You can sue anyone for anything.
Right.
But to win, you have to prove loss.
You have to have what we call in civil procedure, you have to have standing to sue. And standing to sue means you have to have an injury or a loss, and that you can still sue somebody, like you just said, but that lawsuit might even get dismissed before it even goes anywhere.
Or even face punitive damages if you're in a state that, you know, allows people to be sued for legal fees for I can't remember what the correct legal term is, but basically harassment lawsuits and frivolous lawsuits. I know there's a legal term for it, but I know some states, they'll actually fine you if they look at the lawsuit and you tried to get a court date and it was a frivolous lawsuit, they'll fine your ass.
Right.
They'll fine your lawyer too.
Yeah. So exactly. So the point is loss is a key component. But it's also, you just don't want to be promising things that aren't true. So the point is reps and warranties are going to be in every deal. You would hope and you would think, but it's not always the case. You want to make sure they're in there. And I will also say this. We're talking about asset sales here, guys, but on occasion, we do have stock sales. It's not typically a recommended thing because from a liability standpoint as a buyer, you're now taking on the actual corporation of the seller instead of buying assets and putting them in your own corporation. And just from a tax standpoint, I think a lot of CPAs wouldn't like it because as a buyer, you're not buying assets. It's possible you wouldn't be able to write them off in the same manner because you're just
interesting. I hadn't even considered that.
But so I don't recommend that. But on occasion, it needs to be done. Like for instance, in California, we have practices that are Delta Premier status that this buyer doesn't want to lose. They they underwrote the deal based on making the amount of money the seller did, and if they're not billing at the same rates as seller, then obviously that's a different ballgame. And so they might decide to buy the stock with the hopes that they could keep the Premier status. Random things like that. It's pretty rare. But let's just say you do a stock purchase. Really important to make sure those reps and warranties are in there. I've even had an opposing attorney tell me that they're never in there. That's not true. I promise you, they need to be in there. So treat it the same.
They're never in yours, and that's why you suck as a lawyer.
Exactly. So number 4 is reps and warranties.
Fantastic. So that brings us up to our close at number 5 before we jump on to talking a little bit about real estate.
Well, I think this is a good intro to the real estate. And what's a good intro is the lease or the building that's associated with the premises. I mean, I think that is really a huge component of these deals. And we touched on it a lot as far as the assignment and subletting scenario to begin with. So I'm not going to dive back into that because all these listeners have probably heard that. But just to kind of give a quick summary is if there's a lease on the premises, in order to transfer the lease, you often have to get the landlord's consent, but you want to make sure you're reviewing that document to make sure that it is allowing you to do that. And if it's not, that you get the proper permission as a seller, and as a buyer that you're reviewing that lease, because those are the shoes you're going to be stepping into. So, often buyers will say, hey, I want to save the money. Do I really need to hire your law firm to review this lease that I can't probably change? I'm just going to get transferred over. Well, absolutely you do, because A, you want to know what you're getting into. You want to understand your lease. And B, from occasion, it could be prohibitive. I mean, if there's a clause in there that says you have to share profits of the sale with the landlord, or there's a relocation clause that says the landlord can relocate you at any time that they want, which we...
Oh, good God. Can you imagine losing your build out?
Right.
That's money right there.
Right. I mean, I just had a client reach out that they got relocated and the landlord only gave him $25K or something like that.
At least they gave him some TI, because
20 for,
wow.
3, 4, 500,000,
I know gosh, that would hurt so much.
It's going to hurt.
But one of the ones I've heard about, and I don't know how common it is, but it definitely seems predatory to me, is what they'll do is they'll say, if you don't finish your lease up, you owe us to pay for the rest of the lease. And usually there's a clause that says if someone else picks the lease up during that time, then it's prorated up to the point where a new tenant takes over the building. But in some cases, they don't do that. And in those cases, I have heard of landlords still demanding the rest of the 5-year or 10-year lease be paid. And they've already found a tenant. Someone's already renting, but they're double dipping there. That's definitely something you want your lawyer to look at, guys.
Absolutely. And
how often does that happen? Because I've heard about it twice now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as a buyer on the buy side, part of going through the process of getting the lease signed also shows you who the landlord is, what their flexibility is. This is going to be your landlord. So it's almost like an interview to some degree. So I think, the lease is really critical. And then obviously if the seller owns the building, same thing, the lease is going to be critical for both parties. For a seller that's keeping the building, this is part of their investment, long-term usually, and they want to treat that, with care. And then if you're a buyer, you want to negotiate a proper and fair lease because that's going to be what you are getting into for probably 5 to 10 years at a minimum. And you're making $1 million commitment, in a lot of these cases. And so you have to make sure you're getting that reviewed. So I think, the lease, and then obviously if you're buying the building or selling the building, if you're a seller, that's going to be critical too. So I think, the fifth thing that I would say is really important is the real estate. And this is a really good sort of intro to the next thing we're going to talk about. But dentists, please hear this from me. Real estate is critical. And I can't tell you how many of you, I don't know how to say this best, but dentists, in my opinion, don't value real estate as much as they should. A lot of our dental, for instance, our sellers, it's they'll sell the practice. That's the main event. And then the real estate's like a throw-in. And that's not the case. The real estate is critical in these transactions. It should be treated just as important as the practice sale. And for all the reasons that we've kind of referenced already on this podcast. And so I just want to shout that loud and clear because, I can't tell you how many doctors out there will come to us with a lease problem and say, yeah, well, I didn't get it reviewed by a lawyer. Probably should have. Well, wait a minute. Yep. You just did the biggest deal of your life. And you didn't want to spend a few grand or whatever it is to have a lawyer review.
Oh, yeah, some of ours are pretty damn cheap.
It's mind-blowing to me, honestly. And it's So anyway.
It's crazy to me too, because your practice, when you assess things as an investor, when you intentionally look at what makes you money and where you're putting your money and your efforts, your practice is literally the most dangerous investment that you will make in your entire life. Real estate is far, far more valuable because of the fact that it's not that big of a danger. As long as you're paying the note, the real estate most likely is going to be going up. You get hurt, real estate's still going up. You get hurt, your practice isn't making shit.
Yeah, absolutely. So that would be number 5.
Excellent. Okay, guys. So we're going to switch gears a little bit here, and we're going to talk a little bit more about just real estate in general. And then we're going to discuss a little bit about what QOZs are. And you also have, by the way, I've often heard it QOF, and I've also heard it as, something Z. I don't know. I've heard QOZs, I've heard QOFs, and I've heard a couple of other phrases. It's all the same thing, right? It's all the same qualified opportunity zone investments.
That's
right?
Correct.
Okay. You guys got so darn many acronyms. It's hard to keep up. Okay. So go ahead and come out swinging. Let's talk about real estate.
So on the note of real estate, this is going to apply, I think, to everybody from a dentist standpoint. I think it's going to apply to sellers in particular. When you talk about the QOZ tax benefits, the qualified opportunities on tax benefits, but it really applies to everybody because everybody could be an investor. And, just kind of starting from the foundation, a qualified opportunity zone is a zone in the country that the government has essentially said, we want to improve this area. So what we're going to do to help improve these areas of the country are we're going to give tax benefits for those that invest in these areas. And, the laws are very complicated as far as this is concerned. So, on this podcast, I'm going to be as in plain English as I can be. But the government took a census from 2010, and they've outlined areas that they really needed to develop. And that census has not changed. And so what's happened is that a lot of opportunity has arisen over the years because there are areas that are more well-developed now that are still obviously qualified opportunity zones and provide a lot of, hence the word opportunity zones, opportunity for those to invest.
Right.
So the government has outlined these areas and said, you're going to get tax benefits if you invest in these areas. And typically what this applied to is people with capital gains tax. People who have gain and need a tax solution, the opportunity zone was really what this was built for. And so
No, it has to be a real estate gain though, doesn't it?
it does not actually. So
Really?
and that's kind of where it comes full circle into, we as a law firm have been asked for many, many years for solutions from clients for investment.
Yeah, I just got this huge tax day. What am I going to do?
Right.
Uncle Sam will take 20% of what I earned.
Right. So from an investment standpoint, just in general, but also from a tax standpoint, and they know that we're not a tax firm, but people do look to their lawyers for answers, and so they've asked for tax solutions. And so we've always said, "We'll go to your tax professionals." But what occurred to us in our property law firm that we have is that we have a lot of clients in the non-healthcare space that are taking advantage of opportunity zones. And I sat there saying to myself, "This is the perfect solution for dentists," because dentists who are selling practices, for all those out there, a 1031 exchange is a similar thing in the real estate world where you can have tax benefits if you sell a real estate property. And
it must have been the 1031 I was thinking of. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was sitting here racking my brain. I was like, I know I looked into both of these at the same time. Thank you. It was the 1031.
So a 1031 applies just to real estate. So you would have to sell real estate and then buy other real estate within a certain period of time in order to get the benefits from not paying the gain. But there was no solution really for those that have capital gains tax and just sold a business. They sold stock. It doesn't have to be that you sold a business. You could have sold stock. Anything that you have gain on would apply. And so there is no better solution than a qualified opportunity zone for those that have taxable gain, because it does apply to anybody who has gain, whether it's real estate or whether it's a practice sale or whether it's stock, etc. So we sat there and said, well, this is like a home run for our clients because we do 300 to 400 practice sales a year. We have a lot of clients that have taxable gain and they need a solution. So what we did is we have brought our clients an opportunity. Now, this isn't like a sales pitch for my fund, which, I'll explain. This is more about you as dentists understanding that opportunity zones are out there, and I want you to be educated and understand these, whether it's ours or somebody else. So point being is that the government has identified these areas, and they've given tax benefits to those with taxable gain, and I'll touch on those benefits momentarily. And so why wouldn't everybody do this? And why isn't this a bigger thing? And why have you not heard of it very much? There's two reasons. Number one, it's really hard to get a fund together, to pool a fund together with people with taxable gain. There aren't that many people out there that just have access to a lot of people that have taxable gain. And so it's really hard to pool a fund together. So that's one reason. The second is that a lot of these areas are blighted and they're not good areas to invest in. And the one thing we advise clients you don't just do this for the tax benefit. It has to be an area that makes sense from an investment standpoint.
Right.
And because the government wants to develop these areas, they're usually blighted and they're not very good areas. And so most areas in the country that we found are just not good opportunities. However, there are some areas that are great opportunities, some of which are in Texas, where you're sitting, obviously. But South Florida is the most vibrant real estate market in the country and most in the world behind Dubai. And while the whole rest of the country right now is slowed down and is kind of on pause because of what's happening economically, South Florida is just continuing to go and go and go. And it's because there's a lot of movement to South Florida. FinTech is moving to South Florida. There's a huge occupancy issue there. It's 90%.
I was going to say a lot of this stuff is multi-unit family housing because you've got an area that's booming, but there's nowhere for anyone to live.
Exactly. 98% occupancy in Miami, 22 renters per apartment, meaning 22, the competition for one apartment unit in Miami is 22 people per unit, whereas the nation's average is 9, I believe. So there's a huge need for multifamily. There's all these luxury high rises going up in Miami left and right, but there's really not enough multifamily. And when you look at it, where's multifamily going to go? Well, there are areas that are now well developed since the census came out in 2010 that stated which areas would be opportunity zones, that are in opportunity zones in Miami that are amazing. The Design District in Miami is the second most expensive real estate in the country right now, and that is in an opportunity zone. Now, obviously, we all missed the boat. Now it's second most expensive. We wouldn't want to get in there. It's cost prohibitive. But point is there are areas in Miami that are developing massively, even around the Design District, that are not cost prohibitive, that are still amazing opportunities. So when you couple that with the fact that you can have tax benefits on the tax side from if you have gain, meshing the two together was really a no-brainer for Liam, my partner, and I, in saying, let's bring this. We're doing this on the real estate side for our clients that are not in the healthcare space. Let's bring this to our dental firm, because the perfect solution for dentists. It's a rare opportunity where they're getting to invest in a city that everyone wants to get into right now from an investment standpoint. You're going to build ground up multifamily development in this. It's mixed use, but usually it's going to be, definitely multifamily, because you have to double your basis. I mean, that's one of the rules. And so the only way to do this is kind of ground up construction to be able to double your tax basis. And so, it's just a great opportunity for people from an investment standpoint, but also from a tax standpoint. And then touching on what those tax benefits are, if you have taxable gain and you invest in an opportunity zone, you defer the gain for right now 4 years. It's tax year 26, but you don't pay that till 2027. So it's, you defer the gain for 4 years or 3.5 years at this point. And then you don't pay any gain on the asset itself that you've invested in after a 10-year period. So 10-year hold, most real estate investments are 7 to 10-year holds. Once this is built, 2 to 3 years, the multifamily housing, it's kind of a, it's a 7-year thing from there. But you're in that window. You hold for 10 years. Then after the asset is sold, you don't pay any gain on that asset itself. And you're talking about a ground up construction. So there's really only a room for appreciation. And
Right.
You're obviously in, a highly developed area of the country. So to us, this was a no-brainer. Going back to
Absolutely.
it, just to be clear for the dentists out there, you defer the tax that you're like you sell your practice, you defer the tax for the 4 years. Now, we were just in Washington, D.C. for a legislative update, and we are pretty confident that's going to be increased to at least 6 years, so at least 2 more years than it is now. We're not promising that to clients because it's not official, but we do feel that is coming. So you can.
It's a pretty good bet. Anytime that high net wealth individuals are getting a tax break, that our senators are going to keep it in because they happen to be high wealth individuals.
Absolutely. And so with that said, we feel like it's going to get extended even more. And so what that means is that you sell your practice, you could just give it to the government then, or you can defer that tax, right? Now, deferring the tax doesn't mean that you don't pay it. You still have to pay that tax later. However, what an opportunity zone fund provides for, and you'd have to investigate this with other opportunity zones, and I can't speak for them for our fund in particular. We have budgeted the pro forma and everything we're doing, or a refinance event at the 2-3 year period where we would refinance, pull the equity out, and pay it back to the investors to help pay down or mitigate their gain. I mean, right now, the pro formas can change, but right now our pro forma is predicting around $50 million to be able to pay back to investors to help mitigate their gain. So it's a tax mitigation thing, or it could help potentially eliminate the tax. So that's just one example.
Remember, folks, tax mitigation is legal. Tax evasion is not.
Right.
So
Exactly.
One of the things I love about these funds is that, you're deferring paying those taxes. And I mean, particularly look at the economy. There's so damn much inflation. It's a no brainer in this instance. And inflation's not going away. I mean, when they talk about a decrease in inflation, they're talking about a decrease in the rate of increase of inflation, guys. It's not that inflation went away. So when you're paying a deferred tax, you're actually using 6 year ago money to pay today's taxes. You didn't get any penalties on that. So you just made money just on that because you had the use of that money, or making money for you for this many years. It's really a no-brainer.
Yeah,
Now,
our fund in particular actually gives preferred returns to investors that accrue from the start. Now, granted, it wouldn't start being paid until the units are leased up, but we're accruing it from the beginning. So that's another tactic we're using to help mitigate the taxes. So again, you can pay it when you sell your practice, or you can defer it for 4 years and hopefully longer. And in the meantime, you can mitigate or eliminate the tax that you owed, and you might not pay it, or you may not pay some of it. So, that's huge. But then what you invest in itself, you're not paying gain on, after the sale of that asset. So it's really, and there are other benefits too, but, these are kind of the main ones. And so that's why we just felt like this was a no-brainer for the dental community to be aware.
Absolutely. So one question for you there. I recall, if I'm not conflating the two again, with the 1031 exchange, I believe that you've got to already have the vehicle lined up before the taxable event occurs. So you've got I think a window of 2 months maximum before that money's got to be in something else. If I'm not mistaken, the QOZs aren't quite that strict about taxation. How does that work?
Yeah.
Is there a timeline?
I'm really glad
for whenever
that. There is a timeline. So if your gain is personal gain, then you have 6 months from the time that you've sold the practice to be able to invest in a QOZ. If you took gain that's corporate gain, it's a little complicated, but it can be longer than that. It can be up to year and a half or so. However, if you invest in a fund, there are unique things you can do as a fund that I'm not going to get into here just because they're very complicated from a legal standpoint, but there are things you can do to buy way more time. So if you still need to invest in the fund within those 6 months, but then the fund itself can then has bought itself more time essentially through a multi-tiered corporate structure. So, but I mean, I think really the bottom line, dentists, is you should think about it in your mind as you sell your practice, you have 6 months, and you got to put it in a QOZ fund.
Fantastic. All right, I'm going to let you close this up with a couple of finishing statements, including how people can get in touch with you now that they've heard all of the amazing things you can do to save them and make them money. I think we need to give them your website, your firm's name, and perhaps the phone number one more time.
Yeah, sure. So one website that I did not provide to start with, I thought it'd probably be better timing now, is for our QOZ. Now, again, I'm not a huge I'm not selling you guys on this. I'm educating you, and there are other QOZs. You need to do your due diligence. Obviously we'd love to chat with you anytime about ours, but really the key is it would be good for you to go to our website just to see how this type of thing works. It's www.sf, so Sam Frank, QOZfund.com. So www.sfqozfund.com. And what does that stand for? It's SF is South Florida, and QOZ is Qualified Opportunity Zone, and then fund, obviously, is fund. Now, also to be clear, investors don't have to be in Florida to invest in this QOZ. You can be anywhere in the country. We've chosen South Florida because of the opportunity and because we think that it's an area where the investment is good, as well as, obviously, tax benefits. For our law firm, it's Cohen Law Firm, PLLC.com. It's COHEN LAWFIRM P as in Paul LLC.com. And my email address is just my name, David, at Cohen Law Firm PLLC.com. My cell phone number, 206-919-9060. Again, the community has not abused it, so I'll continue to give it out till that happens. Hopefully it never does. And everyone's been respectful typically, so I give that out. So it's much appreciated. I just think for dentists out there, you're so great at what you do, and you're so locked in on what you do. And I think it's important to sort of look at, all the great things that you can do as well as your practice, and just educating yourself to the best of your ability, the same way you've educated yourself on dentistry, is really going to be critical, because you have tools and resources that many others do not, to be able to take advantage of some of these things. So I'm just excited for you, for all the opportunities, and to know that they're out there, that you can excel in business beyond just your practice. So it was exciting to be on this podcast, and I know that this is a celebrity opportunity to be part of this. And I just, thank you, Doc, for having me on here and asking amazing questions and having some great thoughts on things.
Absolutely. I should say that this is not a paid promotional, but that I have actually been working with David on a really cool project for you guys out there. I've told you that we were going to try to put together an associate contract and that everyone could use. And I think we came up with something pretty good. So we'll be launching that pretty soon. David, thank you for coming onto the show today. Really enjoyed talking with you. And heck, I think we may get enough questions from the audience that will bring you on again and maybe clear up some of the specifics of those. Guys, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate you guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.